Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back with you in MetaPod. And in this episode, we're going to be drilling into this phenomena called the forever labor shortage. And the fact that having a stable workforce now and in the future is a crucial challenge all organizations face, whether it's their internal business or upstream suppliers, and in some cases, helping their downstream customers cope with the fact that they're shorthanded, they don't have the talent they need to get things done. Now, I'm really pleased to have with us today Jim Bitterle with EDSI, and I've known Jim for over 20 years, and we've collaborated on many different things. It's kind of one of the first guys I think about when I hear an organization talking about, just can't hire enough people to keep our plant running, and we're having these kinds of challenges. He's on almost to my auto dial, to reach out to. So we're looking forward to some gems of wisdom that Jim is going to share with us. He's going to get into a diagnostic to get us started. What are the top 3 things we really should look at and carefully consider our vulnerability and potential opportunity from a diagnostic perspective. And then after that, we'll come back and say, great, so what do you do? If you determine, yes, in fact, those are challenges you have to cope with, what do you do? So with that, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, we do go back a long way, and I've appreciated our relationship. My background is really, as a kid, I studied supply chain management at Michigan State University, and spent time at General Motors and manufacturing. And then after that, I went to the Kellogg School at Northwestern and studied marketing and finance, and ended up at Deloitte Consulting, where I did really a broad variety of organizational and strategic sort of projects, and of course, a number of operational projects as well. And like many consultants, they hit a point in their career where I was on the road 50 weeks a year, 5 days a week. And it became clear to me when we had 3 little kids that I needed to make a change. Otherwise, I may not even be part of the family anymore. So I took a job with one of my clients, a company called the Flint Ink Corporation, and I had a great opportunity. Flint Ink, most people don't even know who they are. They're the largest American manufacturer of colorants. So there are newspapers, magazines, packaging. A third of all the color you see in a grocery store was Flint Ink. And I started as their VP of manufacturing, and had a great opportunity to run their commercial and packaging group, then was promoted to the president of Asia Pacific. So I moved to Australia, took my whole family with me, did that for a number of years, and then we sold the company, and we were about a $3 billion company when I left, and then went into consulting. I had a non-compete, so I was sort of forced into that world, and here I am years later. I absolutely love it. I just found that now that I don't have to travel like I used to travel at Deloitte, to me, it's wonderful because I can work directly with business owners and business leaders to really affect change in a positive way. And I've fallen into really doing a ton of work in the organizational design and culture space simply because it's out of necessity. Every company that I have worked with in the last 20 years has had increasingly significant issues with finding, attracting, and retaining talent. And what I've learned, and I guess maybe something that I've been really lucky about, is many of these companies, I see them doing really terrible things all the way to the really good things. So I see what's working and what's not working. And we also have a number of younger consultants that do a lot of research for us. So we kind of learn what's happening and what works and what doesn't work in terms of attraction, retaining, and really developing great talent. Because Ron, I'm sure you know, and you hear this all the time from your clients, it's the biggest issue out there, right? I know with your background, you remember back in the day when companies were failing because they couldn't keep up with quality, right? And today, and that was a big issue. Like, we saw tons of manufacturers go out of business because they couldn't stay current in terms of quality. Toyota kind of changed the world on us. And today what we're seeing tons of organizations fail, or at least unable to grow and achieve their goals financially and strategically because they can't attract and retain the talent that they need. So we're in this whole new world where it's incredibly important, and it's going to get worse over the next really 5 to 10 years.
No, it's not going to get worse. It's going to continue to get worse based on the research I've seen. And, this war on talent problem, that's just not going to go away at all. So let's pivot now, and thank you for that. That was excellent. Let's pivot and kind of get into the diagnostic, right? So in your mind, what would be like those top three areas if you're an organization that you should just pause and say, do I have this? What's a problem, right? Just as a diagnostic, how do I determine whether or not this could be a real problem for us so that later as you get into the diagnostic, we can think through about what to do if those things tend to be true. So I'll let you take it from the top on those three things.
Great question, because a lot of times people say to me, well, Jim, things like culture and turnover, they're sort of touchy-feely and we can't measure them. And that's completely untrue. And we see great organizations that succeed that are very good at measuring. So really good question, Ron. And I tell everybody, when you start to go down this path, before you even start, make sure that you have ownership, executive buy-in to how you're thinking, and make sure they understand how critical this issue is. Because you could spend a lot of time doing diagnostics and trying to make change happen. And if the leadership doesn't truly understand how serious this issue is, you're going to struggle to get their attention and the resources that you need. So that's always my caveat to anybody that I talk to. But I always say, start by measuring your culture. And how do you do that? I always start with a talent dashboard. Many of us have seen dashboards for sales or manufacturing or what have you, but you really need to have a talent dashboard. And some critical things that I tell people to look at your organizational turnover rate, right? Turnover has gone up since 2017. So we're at 7 years of increasing turnover levels nationally. Granted, in 2023, it actually started to come down a little bit, but we're still in stratospheric levels. So measure your turnover rate, measure your annual turnover rate. Look at how many positions you have vacant. Today, 7% of all positions in America are vacant. And it's creating chaos and lots of cost. It's creating service issues, quality issues. It's like a cancer going through organizations with these vacant positions. So you need to measure them. Measure your employee engagement. There is one metric. It's called the Employee Net Promoter Score. And it is the gold standard for measuring employee engagement. And I'm happy to talk you through that if we have time at some point, Ron. But measure employee engagement. I also say measure your Glassdoor score and your Indeed score. If you go to Glassdoor and Indeed, you will actually see a score that ex-employees have given you as well as your current employees. And you want to see how you compare, because young workers, young people will absolutely go to Indeed or Glassdoor. They will look to see what your score is. And because it's an employee's market, if you have an average or a below average score, they won't even send an application into your company. So it's absolutely critical that you understand where you are there and that you're measuring that. And maybe a last thing that I would mention is days to fill. How long does it take you typically to fill a vacant position? Because that's an indication of a lot of different things, but it's something that as you make positive changes in your organization, that number should go down and down and down.
And I need to interrupt that if I turn for a moment, because you really made me think of a couple of things. So that days to fill metric is crucial, because I've always tried to explain to folks that when you get candidates that even raise their hand, the longer they're in your process, the more unlikely they're ever going to get hired, right? So they're like produce on the shelf, and time kills all deals, right? And so that's one thing. So that's a really crucial metric. But the other add-on question I wanted to ask you, how do you benchmark that stuff? What's been your experience about how, as a practical matter, it's just like a benchmark thing. Like, let's just take the employer net promoter thing. Do I need to say, is it a zero-based measurement, or is there industry numbers out there? Like, I can't be perfect, but I want to be better than the competition. So what about benchmarking? What's your experience there?
Yeah. It's interesting in certain metrics, there's good benchmarks available from, say, SHRM or Society of Human Resource Management.
Right.
But there are also benchmarks in some of the industry associations that may exist. But
that makes sense.
It's very hit or miss, Ron. So it's not like, hey, here's the gold standard, go here and you're going to find all this. What I always tell people is start with your own dashboard that is time-phased. So look at how you did in January, and then February, and then March. And as you do this over time, you see, am I trending in the right direction or the wrong direction? So yes, look for some benchmarks, but more importantly, track yourself to see, am I getting better or worse?
where you think it matters. Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now in the employee net promoter score, I always tell people this: the employee net promoter score is such a critical metric. And I would say to everybody that it's absolutely one of the three critical metrics you must have, period. It goes from a minus 100 to a positive 100 is the range. And if you're below zero, that means you have more detractors, people that think, hey, and the question behind the employee net promoter score is this. It is, how would you rate your company as a place to work, and would you recommend it to a counterpart or to a friend? And the score is 1 to 10. 1 is, if you get a job offer from this company, you should run because it's a horrible place to work. All the way up to 10, which is if you get an offer, you have to jump at it because this is a phenomenal place to work. 9s and 10s are promoters, just like the net promoter score for customers. 7s and 8s are neutral, and 6s and below are detractors. So if you have a net promoter score of less than 0, that's not great. Really, I tell people that you want to get up to about 20, right? You want to continually improve, first of all. But once you get to about 20, you're starting to make headway. But you have to get up to around 60 to 70 before you start to get to world class. And I always tell people, it's a journey, like anything. You want to pursue becoming world class, because once you hit that level, you're going to be one of those organizations. And let me give you a real quick example, if that's okay. Costco is a company that has a really high employee net promoter score. Costco is in the retail business. In that industry, we see turnover levels typically in the 70 and above rate, right? So 70 to 80% of their employees turn every year. Costco has a 6% turnover rate. Can you imagine how it changes the game for them relative to other retailers? And a big part of it is because they've driven this engagement level up among their employees. And there's a lot of factors here. So you want to shoot for that, what I always consider the world-class levels, because once you get up there, then you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be winning the war for talent, and you're not going to be having so many of these issues that companies are having.
Yeah. Let's move on to your second diagnostic, Dan, because I'll have more questions later.
So the second thing, and I will be brutally frank here, 5 years ago, this wouldn't have been in the top 3. And today it is. You absolutely must do compensation and benefits benchmarking. You better figure out where you stand relative to the market, because when we look at the data, historically, people didn't change jobs for compensation. It was never one of the top 3 reasons people changed jobs. It was a reason, but not one of the top 3 reasons. And since 2022, it's been either number 1 or number 2. It's one of the top 2 reasons people are changing jobs. And it's changing so quickly. Workers understand, especially younger workers that are more apt to change, they understand that it's an employee market and it's supply and demand, and they are in demand. So you better be competitive from a compensation and benefit standpoint. So
yes, I'd like to ask a question on this one too, that I don't know if you were going to mention it or not, but so I wonder, again, kind of back to the benchmarking kind of notion, would you say that you got to benchmark that a little bit too, of course. And so is it industry specific? Is it region specific, or is it some mix of that really impacts? Because here again, you're not looking to be the best paying organization. You need to be good enough, right? You need to be good. You don't need to be perfect. So it would be more regional, more industry. What's the influencers when you do that benchmarking?
Yeah, that's super important, because I see people screw that up all the time, Ron. Real quick story. I'm talking to the CEO of a bank, and it's a mid-sized regional bank. And he says to me, Jim, I do a compensation and benefits benchmark every year. And he goes, I can't keep tellers. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. What is your compensation strategy, and who are you benchmarking against? And he goes, well, he's a regional banker, so he benchmarks against regional banks. I'm like, okay, that seems to make sense on the surface. Who are you losing tellers to? And he goes, well, I'm losing them to Chase and Bank of America, et cetera. And I'm like, well, okay, let's take a step back. Your competition for talent is not just regional banks. It's also these large national and multinational entities. So to your point, who do you benchmark against? So it depends on the job. Some jobs are easily transferable to other industries. So, for example, accountants. If you're in, let's say you're in the steel industry and you're benchmarking accountants, you better look regionally at all industries because accountants can go anywhere, right? So at the end of the day, now you might have some specialty jobs that are very industry specific. Then you can stick within your industry. And I tell people, stick with it's okay to look at your industry, but they also may have transferable skills where they can go elsewhere. So look at your industry and look at just your region. And you don't want to go too far geographically because people aren't generally willing to make a move or take a job that's more than 75 miles from their home. So you gotta play that game a little bit, but it really depends on the job and both are acceptable. But my primary advice is be very careful that you don't get stuck in this pattern of comparing yourself only to your competitors that are, within 10 miles of your operation, because at the end of the day, there's many more competitors for labor out there.
Okay. What would be your third diagnostic?
So the third thing is really diagnosing your own culture. The difficulty starts here. Most people are like, well, Jim, I don't even know how culture's so touchy-feely. I don't know how to diagnose my culture. I don't know how to describe it. And I always say, start by describing your existing culture, right? And there's high-level stuff, right, like vision and mission. But then once you get into core values, how many do you have? I always say, if you got more than 3 core values, you got too many. And does every employee in your organization know what your core values are, right? And do they actually impact the way people decide, make decisions, and behave and treat one another and treat customers and treat suppliers? So you got to start there, right? And then you got to describe what are common behaviors in our organization. What are common issues? What are common good behaviors, bad behaviors? What are the management styles? We have a list of 16 different management styles that exist. What we find in most organizations is you might find 7 or 8 or 9 different management styles all existing within the 4 walls of your organization. The problem with that is then you start to get this multiple fractionalized culture where it's not consistent from one department to the next or one area to the next. And so it could be that your culture is, it's very different from one division to the next, one department to the next, one building to the next, whatever it might be. So you have to define it. And so to me, it's very important to get through that process so you really know what you've got. And oftentimes I'm asked, well, how do you do that? Selfishly, I say you should you hire a third-party consultant to come in and do it because that's what we do. But you can do it yourself too, right? You can do it with survey money.
Let's not get ahead to the how to do it just yet. Let's hold that.
Oh, okay. I won't get in there. Let's hold off on that.
And talk more about talent development strategy.
So talent development strategy is...
Or talent management strategy.
Okay. From a talent management strategy, it's important that you have an overall strategic plan when it comes to talent. And what does that look like? Well, that can be, how are we going to compensate people, right? Do we want to be in the 75th to 90th percentile of comp and benefits? Do we want to be 50 to 75%, but we want to be really good with benefits? Do we want to be a super flexible organization where we create more flexibility for employees than anywhere else? So your talent strategy then also has to be, are we hiring for culture? Are we hiring for skills or some set thereof? And have we defined what that is? And we've trained everybody that interviews people to look for certain things, right? Part of your talent management strategy is, how do we develop people? Do we have a very clear process and system for developing our people from the minute they hit our door through the time they retire, right? Because there's a huge skills gap out there. And Ron, I know you know this in your business. It's very, very hard in a number of different areas to find people with the skill sets, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need for different roles. So you need to assess them, and then you need to train them. And there's one other element that I think is absolutely critical to a good talent management strategy, and that is identifying career ladders and career lattices. You need to identify those career paths and then tie your development into those so that anybody can see, hey, if I get this job, I'm going to get trained for that job so I don't get thrown into it and just flounder about till I figure it out. We all know the Peter principle, right? And that is, you take this good person, they're doing a great job, you keep promoting them and all to the point that they fail. And it's like, well, we promoted them too far. 9 out of 10 instances where we've seen the Peter principle, it had nothing to do with the person's skills, knowledge, or ability. I take that back. Their innate ability, but it had to do with their skills or their knowledge in terms of how were they prepared for that role? Were they actually trained to do a good job? You've seen it. A great engineer might be a great engineer. They might be an awful manager, but they probably never had management training. How do you supervise and manage a group of engineers when you used to be one of them, right? So you just learn from the person you learn from. So the talent management strategy has to be fairly broad and look at things like your comp, your benefits, your flexibility, your culture, how you hire, how you train, how you develop people. And the culture then has to be that last subset. What environment do we want these people to be in? And maybe the most important element, right? Because that's what we all feel as employees every day.
All right, so we're going to get into what to do about it, but I have a follow-on question here that's partly diagnostic and partly what to do, right? If you want to be successful with talent management strategy, and think about the org chart. And who owns talent management strategy in the organization, right? So if you think about, we've got CEO, got your VPs, and then you've got, finance. You may or may not have a chief human relations officer. HR as a function might be tucked underneath finance, or it might be tucked underneath operations. It could be totally decentralized where every functional division or functional group has its own responsibility for job descriptions, SOPs, workforce development, versatility diagram management, all the other techniques that come into play. For companies that truly succeed, where should, from a diagnostic perspective, ownership of that talent management strategy, where should that be on the work chart? And functionally, where should that be? And it probably depends, but I am interested in your opinion.
Very important point that you make, Ron, and that is, let me first start by saying what we often see is companies that are failing is that the CHRO or the director of HR, the manager of HR, whatever that title is, that person is buried somewhere in the organization and they're a functionary, right? In the companies that are succeeding, that person has been elevated 9 out of 10 times, reporting directly to the CEO, okay, in a very strategic role. And the most common title is the CHRO, right? Chief Human Resource Officer. So that's what we see technically. That person is responsible for driving what that strategy looks like. The CEO has to make sure that that's embedded in the strategic plan. It needs to be part of the strategic plan. So the CEO owns the strategic plan and therefore owns the talent strategy, but the development thereof really starts with that CHRO and getting that buy-in from the CEO. Because if the CEO doesn't live the strategy, the culture, the values, it all falls apart because it flows downhill, right? So that person needs to own it and they need to live it.
Right. Awesome. Let's pivot to what do you do now? Let's pretend that, with careful thought, we've examined what we're doing and realize we have gaps. We have either threats or real opportunities. Let's come back down and talk about, what do you do? What are the tactical things, the advice you would give to organizations that realize they do want to improve in these areas? How do we go do that? The nitty gritty of how we do that, not just why, but the how.
This is where people get stuck, and I see leaders get stuck most often, right? They recognize they have a problem, but they're unsure of how to make the fundamental changes so that they can be the Costco instead of the Sam's Club, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is this: you have to start by having buy-in at the top level to recognize you have an issue, right? It's like it's like if somebody has a problem with substances, the first step in that recovery is recognizing they have a problem. It's no different when you have a talent management issue in terms of attracting, recruiting, retaining talent. So you got to recognize that. And then I always say, start measuring, put some metrics in place, get that dashboard in place so you can see how are we doing. And to your point earlier, See if there's some metrics out there where you can compare yourself against your industry or national numbers or some of the numbers from the Society of Human Resource Management. So start measuring. The next thing is make sure you then define, I would say, do the comp and benefits benchmarking, because it's tactical and it's also one of those things that can have a direct, quick hit for you by just addressing that and fixing the trouble spots. But then define your culture. Ron, you remember, and I know you know this better than I do, when you think about continuous improvement and you talk about change, you talk about what's my current state, what do I want my future state to be, and how am I going to get there? It's the same process with culture transformation. You have to focus on your culture and what I call the talent ecosystem, which is everything in your business that affects employees. That's from recruiting to retaining to training to the culture to the management styles that exist to how you pay them to the physical environment that they're in. So you want to define, what does your culture look like? What does your overall talent ecosystem look like? And then you've got your current state. And then you want to sit down with a key group of folks in your organization and define what you want it to be. What does that future state look like to you? Define what is that ideal management style that you want people to have. What are your core values? What are behaviors that you want to encourage? What are behaviors that you want to discourage, right? If somebody gets in trouble for making a product that has a quality issue, if you beat them up over making a mistake, then they're going to hide it in the future, right? So what you want to do is create the environment that you know will be successful in your world. So define that future state. And then what you're going to see, Ron, are all kinds of gaps between where you are today and where you want to get. And then you create an implementation plan of how you get there. That's, at 100,000 feet, that's the starting point.
Yeah, I gotta ask a question here, and you may be getting to it here shortly. I've worked with organizations in the past, like continuous improvement projects, and generally you go out and you ask people to share what they're experiencing, their perspectives, kind of, almost like an employee survey. Now, one of the reasons I get pushback from organizations is I'm afraid to ask because then I have to do something about it. And the other fear they have is, wait a minute, I've got all these mid-level managers. I have no idea how to behave and how to have those difficult conversations. Would you also assert that you have to assess your ability to execute at some level and trust that?
Yeah. And so here's the difficulty with what you just mentioned. I see companies in a death spiral because of that dynamic, right? Because they're like, first of all, you have a number of vacant positions in your organization. And because of that, everybody is doing double duty in many cases. People are stressed. They're working hard. We just went through a pandemic, which created all kinds of other stressors. So it's difficult to say we need to say this is a high priority and it deserves the kind of attention that it needs. Because you can always push it off to the next day because you have an order that's late, or you have some raw material that's not here and you need to work on expediting it, or whatever the problem may be. There's always an urgent fire to be dealt with. And therefore, we push these issues off, sometimes until your company fails, right? So you have to make sure it is a top priority. And if you don't have the resource internally to do it, I say hire an external resource or a temporary resource, right? A meta ops expert to come in and help out for, 6 months to really get the process rolling. As you know, oftentimes we can be the catalyst for getting the ball rolling. And then once it catches, people go, oh, this is really good. And then it gains its own momentum.
Right.
So it's got to be a priority. And oftentimes you need to bring in that third party set of resources for a period of time. Hey, if you have something happening with a new job that's coming on, you might hire some temps, right, to help you get that job done. The same is true here, only this is way more important because this is the future of your organization. If you need to hire a professional to help you get it going right, then I say do it because it's going to pay for itself 100-fold.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we got lots of other good stuff from an advice perspective. I like this notion, making sure you get that talent dashboard in place. Talk more about, a little more depth here, if you could, around the whole compensation challenge and some of those other things we mentioned earlier in terms of, how do you do it?
Yeah.
At a more granular level. Is there any other additional advice? Because you gave a lot of how-to, as you described the diagnostic. It was natural to talk about what to do. If you have any more wisdom there, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah. So there are a few processes that are the standard processes for looking at compensation and benefits. You have to start with make sure you have a good handle on your own, because here's something that is 100% controllable and 100% internal. We'll see dramatic issues just in the pay scales within an organization. So look at your own house and make sure things make sense, right? Does a supervisor make more money than his or her employees? And does an engineer that has been around for 10 years with high-level skill sets make more than an engineer that's just hiring in from college, right? We see compression and all kinds of issues with comp and benefits all the time. So start with just have a good handle on where you're at. Then you can use, what we do is we have a national agreement with Pay Factors, which used to be Pay Scale. And it's the largest benchmarking database in the world. So you can buy that, or you can hire somebody that already has the license to come in and do that work for you. Or you can hire somebody to benchmark with competitors or with peer companies and do that. Or you can hire somebody to do it. You can do it yourself. It's usually easier to use a third party to do that. The last thing, and sometimes this is really effective, a lot of various industry associations will do compensation benchmarking. So check with your industry association. So Ron, you and I have both worked with some printing companies in the past. And the Printing Industry of America, for example, every year does a really comprehensive compensation and benefits benchmarking program. So you do it via benchmarking, and there's multiple ways to skin that cat.
Interesting. Yeah, so you covered a ton of ground here. Anything else, Murray, how to go do it advice perspective that you didn't touch on? I think you hit everything that we had done in our preparation. Was there anything else about you should do this to solve the problem? Anything else?
Yeah, let me give you a couple of hacks, as the kids say, right? So here's a classic example. I said two of the metrics that you should be looking at are your Indeed score and your Glassdoor score. Because if you're not getting enough applications coming into your organization, chances are you have a bad reputation as an employer or an average reputation as an employer. And if you go to Indeed or Glassdoor and you have a 3.5 or below, that's where you reside, okay? And here's the hack. Get all of your employees to go into Glassdoor and rate your company. Get all of your employees to go into Indeed and rate your company. I've never, ever seen that not have a dramatic positive impact on your score. And we always see immediately afterwards an increase in the number of applications coming into the company. It's like, it's a cause and effect thing. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So that's one of those little things I say, do it. The compensation is obvious, do that. Another thing that I can't stress enough, you have to light a fire under the leaders in your organization. And so what we're seeing is organizations are failing because they can't get the talent and they can't retain the talent that they need. And if you're seeing quality issues go up in your organization, or if you're seeing service issues go up in your organization, or you're seeing overtime go up in your organization, ask the 5 whys. Why is that happening? And when you dig down deep, what you're going to find is you're hiring people, in many cases, that were ill-equipped for the job, that came in without the skills because you're getting desperate. You're hiring people that can pass a drug test, that can fog a mirror, and you're rushing them into positions, and they're making mistakes, right? So it's really important right now that everybody understands how serious this issue, and it's going to get worse. So how are you going to win the war for talent? You better create a strategy, because you're not going to achieve your strategic goals. You're not going to achieve your financial goals unless you win this war for talent. And so once people truly understand that, you start to get way more attention from the executive leadership team. You get more resources, you get more attention, and you get more buy-in to all the changes you want to make. There's a couple other hacks, right? So flexibility. Every study that's out there will show you that employees that work in a flexible environment will tell you it's their number one benefit. Think about that. So if you can find a way to increase flexibility in your organization, and a lot of people think, well, it's the COVID impact, it's this remote thing. Yes, that had an impact. I think it just created greater awareness of flexibility. But this issue has been going on for years. There are great studies out there that tell us that flexibility is critical. And look at some of the, Ron, you see this with some manufacturing clients that you've got. How many of them are now considering going to 410s instead of 5/8s, right? Because suddenly, gosh, if I'm working on the line or I'm an employee, I have fewer commutes every week. I have a 3-day weekend every weekend. As a manufacturer, I have fewer startups and shutdowns, which we all know cause issues. So there's a myriad of ways. And I say, when you look at flexibility, remember there's no silver bullet, but there are things that will work for your company. And oftentimes different departments or different divisions need different programs for flexibility because, one shoe does not fit all. And then the other element but they have to be perceived as being fair. Okay.
All right. Awesome. So Jim, this has been fantastic. And we're going to get into wrap up now. If you don't mind, people are always interested in learning more. They might want to get in touch with you to pry back the onion a little bit more about the tactical, how do you do some of those things or the diagnostic. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So it's Jim Bitterle. Just email me or call me. I don't charge people for emails and calls. I do what I do because I love doing what I'm doing, right? And, I'm 61 years old. I'm at the point in my career, I love working. And what I love is it's the helping people and seeing really good change occur. So email me, jbitterle, jbitterle @edsi.com, or call me. I'll give you my cell number, 734-945-2480. The reality is, if I don't recognize who's calling, I may not answer, but leave me a message. And if I know that you're working with MetaOps, I'm absolutely there to support you and help you in any way I can.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today, Jim.
Thank you, Ron. Great to see you, and have a great rest of your day.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.